At 0800 hours on August 2nd, 1942, Ensign Robert Anderson sits in the cockpit of an SNJ Texan trainer aircraft. The engine is running. The propeller is spinning. The flight deck stretches 45 meters ahead of him. This is his first carrier landing attempt. He has logged 120 flight hours. He has practiced carrier approaches over land, but he has never landed on a moving deck. He is about to try. The deck is moving, not forward through ocean swells, sideways, because the carrier beneath him is not a normal carrier. It is USS Wolverine, a paddle wheel excursion steamer converted to an aircraft carrier. The ship has no propeller. It has no rudder in the conventional sense. It has two massive paddle wheels, one on each side, each 9 meters in diameter. When the wheels turn, the ship moves. When one wheel turns faster than the other, the ship turns. This creates unusual motion. The deck moves forward but also oscillates slightly as the paddle wheels churn. Anderson must time his approach to account for this. The landing signal officer stands on a platform at the deck's port edge. He holds two paddles. The paddles tell Anderson whether his approach is correct. Too high, too low, too fast, too slow. Anderson watches the paddles and adjusts. He is at 60 meters altitude, 50 meters, 40 meters. The LSO signals cut. Anderson chops throttle and pulls back on the stick. The aircraft drops. The wheels touch. The tail hook catches the arresting wire. The aircraft jerks to a stop in 20 meters. Anderson has just completed his first carrier landing on a paddle wheel steamer in Lake Michigan, 80 kilometers from Chicago. This is not how the Navy planned to train carrier pilots, but it is how they are training them. Because in August 1942, the Navy needs carrier pilots desperately and has no carriers to train them on. The problem is straightforward. The Navy requires thousands of carrier-qualified pilots. Carrier qualification requires landing on a carrier deck, but carriers are fighting in the Pacific. They cannot be diverted to training duties. The Navy must find an alternative. That alternative is USS Wolverine and her sister ship USS Sable, two Great Lakes excursion steamers converted to aircraft carriers. They will train more carrier pilots than any other vessels in American naval history. Between 1942 and 1945, they will qualify 17,198 pilots. 116,000 landings will be attempted. 846 aircraft will be lost. None of these aircraft will be recovered. They rest on the bottom of Lake Michigan. Some are still there. The story begins in March 1942. The Navy faces a crisis. The war is 4 months old. The carrier force is engaged across the Pacific. Lexington and Yorktown are fighting in the Coral Sea. Enterprise and Hornet just launched the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. Saratoga is under repair after torpedo damage. Wasp is in the Atlantic supporting British operations. The Navy has 7 carriers operational. It is building dozens more. The Essex-class program will deliver 24 carriers. But carriers without pilots are useless. The bottleneck is pilot training, specifically carrier qualification. Normal carrier qualification training uses operational carriers. Trainee pilots fly to the carrier, make 6 to 8 landings, then return to shore. This works in peacetime. In wartime, it is impossible. Carriers cannot be spared from combat operations for training. The Atlantic and Pacific are too dangerous for training exercises. German submarines patrol the Atlantic. Japanese submarines patrol the Pacific. A carrier conducting training is a vulnerable target. The Navy needs training carriers that can operate safely in protected waters. Captain Richard Whitehead, commanding the Naval Air Station at Glenview, Illinois, proposes a solution: use the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan specifically. The lake is large, over 580 kilometers long. It is protected from enemy action. It is deep enough for carrier operations. And it has infrastructure. Chicago has shipyards. Glenview is already training pilots. Converting lake steamers to training carriers would solve the qualification bottleneck. Whitehead submits his proposal to the Bureau of Aeronautics in March 1942. The Bureau is skeptical. Lake steamers are not carriers. Converting them would be expensive and time-consuming. The conversions might not work, but the Bureau has no better options. Operational carriers cannot be spared. The qualification bottleneck is real. In April, the Bureau approves the concept. It allocates funding for 2 conversions. The ships selected are the sidewheel steamers, C&B and Greater Buffalo. The C&B is a luxury excursion steamer built in 1913 by the Detroit Shipbuilding Company. The ship is owned by the Cleveland and Buffalo Transit Company. It runs overnight passenger service between Cleveland and Buffalo on Lake Erie. The ship is 98 meters long, 18 meters wide, displaces 4,800 tons. It can carry 1,500 passengers in staterooms ranging from luxury suites to basic cabins. The propulsion is two sidewheel paddle wheels driven by reciprocating steam engines producing 8,000 horsepower. Maximum speed is 22 knots. The ship is elegant, well-maintained, and profitable. In peacetime. In wartime, passenger traffic collapses. Fuel is rationed. Steel is needed for warships. The Cleveland and Buffalo Transit Company leases its ships to the government. The Navy acquires C&B in March 1942 for conversion. The ship is sailed to Buffalo where the conversion begins. The conversion will take 5 months and cost $1 million. The conversion is radical. Everything above the main deck is removed. The superstructure, the smokestacks, the lifeboats, all gone. A flight deck is built over the hull. The flight deck is 92 meters long and 16 meters wide. This is smaller than fleet carriers, which have decks 200 meters long and 30 meters wide. But it is adequate for training. 2 small islands are constructed on the starboard side, 1 forward for navigation, 1 aft for flight operations. 3 arresting wires are installed. No catapult is installed. Aircraft will take off using their own power. No hangar deck is installed. Aircraft will be stored on the flight deck or launched directly from shore. The paddle wheels remain. They are the ship's propulsion. No alternative exists. Installing conventional propellers and rudders would require rebuilding the hull. This is impossible within time and budget constraints. The paddle wheels work. They move the ship at 15 knots, adequate for flight operations. The wheels create unusual vibration and motion, but pilots will adapt. The conversion is completed in August 1942. The ship is commissioned USS Wolverine with hull number 964. The designation 9 indicates miscellaneous auxiliary. The Navy does not know what else to call it. The Greater Buffalo undergoes similar conversion. Built in 1924, the ship is slightly larger than CNB, 105 meters long, 19 meters wide, 5,700 tons displacement. Same paddle wheel propulsion? The conversion follows the same pattern. Remove everything above main deck. Install flight deck. Add islands and arresting gear. The conversion is completed in March 1943. The ship is commissioned USS Sable with hull number 981. Now the Navy has 2 training carriers. Both ships operate from Naval Air Station Glenview on Lake Michigan's western shore, 30 kilometers north of Chicago. Glenview is a major training base. It has runways, hangars, barracks, and classrooms. Student pilots complete ground school and flight training at Glenview. Final phase is carrier qualification on Wolverine or Sable. The qualification syllabus requires 8 successful landings and takeoffs. This demonstrates the pilot can operate from a carrier deck. After qualification, pilots are assigned to fleet carriers. They will never see Wolverine or Sable again. But the training is critical. The training cycle operates daily, weather permitting. Wolverine or Sable departs Glenview Pier at 0600 hours. The ship steams to a point 20 kilometers offshore. The ship turns into the wind and maintains course and speed. Aircraft from Glenview fly to the ship. They enter the landing pattern and begin qualification attempts. Each pilot makes 8 to 12 landings depending on performance. Successful pilots return to Glenview. Unsuccessful pilots make additional attempts or are eliminated from the program. The cycle continues until 1700 hours. The ship returns to pier. The next day it repeats. The aircraft used for qualification are trainers. The SNJ Texan is most common. This is a single-engine advanced trainer, 600 horsepower engine. Maximum speed 212 miles per hour. Stall speed 67 miles per hour. The aircraft has 2 seats, one for the student and one for an instructor. During qualification, students fly solo. The instructor remains at Glenview. If the student cannot land safely, he is ordered to return to shore. The SNJ is robust and forgiving. It is ideal for carrier training. Students also qualify in the SBD Dauntless Dive Bomber and the TBF Avenger Torpedo Bomber. These are fleet aircraft. Qualifying in them prepares pilots for operational deployment. The landing procedure is standardized. The aircraft enters the pattern at 300 meters altitude. The pilot flies downwind parallel to the ship. At the stern, the pilot turns 90 degrees onto the base leg. After 15 seconds, the pilot turns 90 degrees onto final approach. The pilot is now aligned with the deck, descending at 100 meters per minute. Airspeed is 80 miles per hour. The LSO provides corrections. If the approach is acceptable, The LSO signals cut. The pilot chops throttle. The aircraft drops. If the tail hook catches the wire, the landing succeeds. If the hook misses, the aircraft may roll into the barrier or off the deck. Either is dangerous. The barrier is a wire net stretched across the deck forward of the arresting wires. If an aircraft misses the wires and does not stop, it hits the barrier. The barrier stops the aircraft but damages the propeller and engine. The aircraft must be craned off the deck and returned to Glenview for repair. This is expensive and time-consuming, but it prevents the aircraft from crashing into aircraft parked forward. The barrier saves lives even as it destroys equipment. Going off the deck is worse. If an aircraft misses the wires and crashes through the barrier, it rolls off the bow into the lake. The pilot has seconds to escape. Most succeed. They inflate their life vests and swim away from the sinking aircraft. Crash boats retrieve them within minutes. Few pilots drown. But the aircraft is lost. It sinks in 70 to 100 meters of water. The Navy does not attempt recovery. 846 aircraft sink this way between 1942 and 1945. The lake becomes an aircraft graveyard. The first casualty occurs September 3rd, 1942. Ensign William Waldrop is attempting his third landing on Wolverine. His approach is too slow. The aircraft stalls 10 meters above the deck. It drops hard. The landing gear collapses. The aircraft skids forward and crashes through the barrier. It goes off the bow. Waldrop is trapped in the cockpit. He does not escape. Crash boats retrieve his body. He is the first of 8 pilots who will die during training on Wolverine and Sable. All 8 deaths occur during landing attempts. All involve either crashes on deck or aircraft going into the lake. None involve combat. These are training fatalities. They are accepted as cost of preparing for war. The paddle wheels create unique challenges. Unlike conventional carriers powered by screws, paddle wheel carriers cannot maintain precise course. The wheels create lateral thrust that varies with wind and wave conditions. Even on calm days, the ship moves slightly sideways as it moves forward. This creates unpredictable deck motion. Pilots must adjust their approaches constantly. The LSO helps, but ultimately the pilot must feel the motion and compensate. This is difficult. It is also valuable training. If a pilot can land on a paddle wheel carrier moving unpredictably, landing on a fleet carrier will be easier. The weather on Lake Michigan is challenging. Summer operations are relatively straightforward. The lake is calm. Visibility is good. Winter operations are brutal. Winds exceed 50 miles per hour. Snow reduces visibility to 0. Ice forms on the deck. The ships cannot operate safely. Training shuts down from December through March most years. This creates scheduling problems. Pilots must wait months to qualify. Some are reassigned to other duties. The Navy accepts this. Winter operations would be too dangerous. The training accident rate would soar. Better to wait for spring. The deck crews are experienced sailors but not experienced in flight operations. Most have never seen a carrier. They learn on the job. The arresting gear is simple compared to fleet carriers. 3 wires. No hydraulic dampers. The aircraft's hook catches the wire. The wire plays out until friction stops the aircraft. If friction is insufficient, the aircraft goes into the barrier. The deck crew adjusts tension constantly. Too much tension and the wire breaks. Too little and aircraft hit the barrier. Finding the balance is art learned through experience. By 1943, the crews are expert. Barrier crashes decline. Qualification rates improve. The LSOs are specially trained officers. They must understand aircraft performance and carrier operations. They must remain calm under pressure. They guide dozens of landings daily. Each landing is life or death decision. If the LSO waves off a good approach, the pilot wastes time and fuel making another attempt. If the LSO signals cut on a bad approach, the pilot may crash. The LSO's judgment determines success or failure. The best LSOs develop intuition. They see an approach and know instantly whether it will work. They cannot explain how they know. They just know. This intuition is developed through thousands of landings. The LSOs on Wolverine and Sable develop this intuition faster than LSOs on fleet carriers because they see more landings per day. The logistics of operating 2 training carriers are complex. Each ship requires coal for the boilers. The paddle wheels are driven by reciprocating steam engines burning coal. The Navy must transport thousands of tons of coal to Glenview. Aircraft require fuel, ammunition for gunnery practice, and spare parts. Pilots require food, housing, and classroom instruction. The infrastructure at Glenview expands continuously. By 1944, The base has 5,000 personnel, 40 buildings, and processes 1,000 pilots monthly. This is mass production of carrier aviators. The aircraft recovery problem is unresolved throughout the war. 846 aircraft rest on the lake bottom. Each aircraft costs between $40,000 and $80,000 depending on type. Total value is approximately $50 million. This is enormous waste, but recovery is impractical. The lake is 70 to 100 meters deep. The water is cold and murky. Salvage technology in the 1940s cannot efficiently recover aircraft at these depths. The Navy considers recovery operations, but concludes they would cost more than the aircraft are worth. The aircraft are abandoned. They become archaeological sites. The first aircraft is recovered in 1944 by sport divers. The divers are not looking for military aircraft. They are exploring shipwrecks. They discover an SNJ Texan sitting upright on the bottom. The discovery is reported to the Navy. The Navy declines to take action. The aircraft is considered abandoned property. Over subsequent decades, divers discover more aircraft. By 2024, 38 aircraft have been recovered. Most are corroded and incomplete. Several have been restored and are displayed in museums. The majority remain on the bottom. They are protected as historical sites. Recreational diving is permitted but disturbing. The aircraft is prohibited. The strategic impact of Wolverine and Sable is difficult to quantify, but undeniably significant. Between August 1942 and November 1945, the two ships qualify 17,198 pilots. These pilots serve on every American carrier in the Pacific. They fly in every major engagement: Coral Sea, Midway, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Okinawa, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Every pilot participating in these battles qualified on Wolverine or Sable or both. Without these training carriers, the qualification bottleneck would have limited American carrier operations. The Essex-class carriers entering service in 1943 require thousands of pilots. Those pilots require carrier qualification. Wolverine and Sable provide that qualification. The impact is indirect but essential. The comparison with Japanese pilot training is instructive. Japan begins the war with supremely trained pilots. Many have combat experience from China. Their carrier qualification is rigorous. They are the best carrier pilots in the world in December 1941. But Japan cannot replace losses. Training infrastructure is limited. Carriers are needed for combat operations and cannot be spared for training. Fuel is increasingly scarce. By 1944, Japanese pilot training is abbreviated. New pilots receive minimal carrier qualification. Some receive none. They are sent to carriers and learn on the job. Many die on their first missions. The quality collapse is catastrophic. By mid-1944, Japanese carrier pilots are so poorly trained that American pilots call the Battle of the Philippine Sea the Marianas Turkey Shoot. 370 Japanese aircraft are shot down. 29 American aircraft are lost. The disparity is partly due to American pilot training superiority. That superiority traces back to Wolverine and Sable. The cost-benefit analysis is favorable. The conversion of 2 lake steamers cost $2 million total. Operating costs from 1942 to 1945 total approximately $8 million. Total program cost is $10 million. This produces 17,000 qualified carrier pilots. Cost per pilot is approximately $582. Training a pilot from recruitment through carrier qualification costs approximately $75,000, including flight school, aircraft, fuel, and instruction. The carrier qualification portion is less than 1% of total training cost. But it is the critical component. Without carrier qualification, the pilot cannot serve on a carrier. Wolverine and Sable provide this qualification efficiently and safely. Well, relatively safely. 8 pilots die. This is tragic, but the accident rate is lower than combat training in other fields. The program is successful by any reasonable metric. The crew experiences on Wolverine and Sable are unique. Most sailors serve on conventional warships. Wolverine and Sable are anything but conventional. The paddle wheels create constant vibration. The coal smoke is thick and black. The flight deck operations are dangerous. Aircraft crash regularly, but the ships never leave Lake Michigan. Crew members sleep in bunks every night. They have shore leave in Chicago every week. They are not shot at. They are not torpedoed. For sailors in World War II, this is remarkably safe duty. Some crew members feel guilty. They are not fighting. They are training others to fight, but their contribution is real. Without them, the pilots cannot qualify. Without qualified pilots, carriers cannot operate. The crew's service is as essential as any combat sailors. The paddle wheel propulsion becomes point of pride. Wolverine and Sable are the only paddle wheel ships in the United States Navy. The last paddle wheel warships were river gunboats in the Civil War. The technology is obsolete but functional. The wheels are reliable. They require constant maintenance. The paddle blades break regularly. Replacing them is difficult. But the wheels work. They move the ships adequately. They become symbol of the ship's unique character. Sailors assigned to Wolverine or Sable tell stories about the paddle wheels for the rest of their lives. The conversion back to civilian service never happens. After the war, both ships are decommissioned. The Navy considers reconverting them to passenger steamers. The cost is prohibitive. The conversions destroyed the original superstructures. Rebuilding them would cost more than the ships are worth. Additionally, passenger steamer traffic is dying. Airlines are taking passengers. Interstate highways are being built. The lake steamer business is obsolete. The ships have no commercial value. In 1947, both ships are sold for scrap. They are cut up in shipyards and melted down. The steel is recycled. Nothing remains except photographs and memories. The pilot testimonials about training on Wolverine and Sable are consistently positive. The pilots appreciate the safe environment. Making mistakes on Lake Michigan is embarrassing. Making mistakes on a fleet carrier in combat is fatal. The paddle wheel carriers allow pilots to learn without dying. Some pilots make 20 or 30 landing attempts before qualifying. On a fleet carrier, they would not have that opportunity. The LSOs are patient. The instructors are experienced. The crashes that do occur are learning experiences. The pilot who crashes learns what not to do. So do the pilots watching? The training environment is demanding but supportive. This is ideal for developing competence and confidence. The technological limitations of the paddle wheel carriers are significant but manageable. No catapult means aircraft must take off under their own power. This requires wind over the deck. The ships must maintain 15 knots into a 10-knot wind to generate 25 knots over the deck. This is minimum for loaded aircraft. On calm days, takeoffs are marginal. Aircraft use every meter of deck, but they get airborne. No hangar deck means aircraft cannot be stored aboard. This limits operations. The ships can handle only the aircraft actively qualifying. This is acceptable for training. Fleet carriers need hangars to service and store dozens of aircraft. Training carriers do not. The arresting gear is primitive compared to fleet carriers. Fleet carriers have hydraulic systems that absorb aircraft energy smoothly. Wolverine and Sable use simple friction. The wire plays out until friction stops the aircraft. This is hard on aircraft. Landing gear is stressed. Airframes are jolted, but the system works. Aircraft are robust enough to handle the stress. Maintenance increases, but aircraft availability remains adequate. The primitive arresting gear actually provides harder training than fleet carriers. If a pilot can land on Wolverine's crude system, landing on a fleet carrier's hydraulic system is easier. The command structure reflects the ship's unusual status. Wolverine and Sable are commanded by senior lieutenants or lieutenant commanders. These are relatively junior officers. Fleet carriers are commanded by captains. But Wolverine and Sable are not fleet carriers. They are training platforms. The commanders are experienced aviators who understand flight operations. They manage the ships competently. They are not expected to command in combat. Their mission is training. They execute this mission successfully. This is sufficient. The public relations value of Wolverine and Sable is substantial. Chicago newspapers cover the ships extensively. Photographers document flight operations. The images are dramatic. Aircraft landing on a paddle wheel steamer is incongruous and photogenic. The Navy encourages coverage. The stories boost morale and recruitment. They demonstrate American ingenuity and industrial capacity. Converting luxury steamers to aircraft carriers exemplifies American adaptability. The coverage is favorable and widespread. Wolverine and Sable become symbols of the war effort. The environmental impact is minimal. 846 aircraft on the lake bottom are archaeological concern but not environmental hazard. The aircraft contain fuel and oil when they sink. These fluids disperse over time. Modern testing shows no contamination. The wrecks are inert. They host fish populations. Divers report the aircraft are encrusted with algae and inhabited by lake species. The aircraft have become artificial reefs. This is unintended benefit. The coal smoke from the paddle wheel engines is environmental impact. Thousands of tons of coal burned over 3 years produce significant air pollution. But this is insignificant compared to industrial pollution from Chicago's factories. The ship's environmental footprint is negligible. The post-war careers of pilots trained on Wolverine and Sable vary widely. Some remain in the Navy and make careers as aviators. Some leave the Navy and become commercial pilots. Some leave aviation entirely and pursue other careers. But all share the experience of qualifying on a paddle wheel carrier in Lake Michigan. This is unusual credential. When commercial aviation expands in the 1950s and 60s, airlines value military-trained pilots. Thousands of airline pilots in the jet age learned to fly on Wolverine and Sable. The training translates to civilian aviation. Carrier landings require precision, judgment, and calm under pressure. These qualities are valuable in any aviation context. The historical preservation efforts focus on recovered aircraft. 38 aircraft have been raised from Lake Michigan. Several have been restored to display condition. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola has an SNJ recovered from Lake Michigan. The EA Museum in Oshkosh has an SBD Dauntless. The Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago has a TBF Avenger. These aircraft are displayed with explanations of their service on Wolverine and Sable. The displays educate the public about this unique chapter of naval aviation history. The aircraft are tangible connection to the thousands of pilots who trained on the freshwater carriers. The comparison with British training methods highlights American advantages. Britain trains carrier pilots on operational carriers when available. When carriers are not available, training is conducted on land-based simulators. The simulators approximate carrier landings but cannot replicate actual conditions. American pilots train on actual carriers, albeit unusual ones. This produces better trained pilots. British pilots arriving at fleet carriers for the first time must adjust to conditions they have only simulated. American pilots arriving at fleet carriers have already landed on moving decks. The adjustment is minor. This is advantage in combat. Better training produces better performance. Better performance produces better outcomes. The question of why the Navy chose paddle wheel steamers rather than building purpose-designed training carriers is economic and temporal. Building a carrier requires 2 to 3 years. The Navy needs training capacity immediately. Converting existing ships requires 5 months. The cost is 1/10 of building new. The paddle wheel steamers are available. They are large enough. They are fast enough. They are adequate for the mission. Purpose-built training carriers would be better, but they would arrive too late. The war cannot wait. The Navy takes the solution available rather than the solution preferred. This is pragmatism. It works. The tactical doctrine development on Wolverine and Sable influences fleet carrier operations. The LSOs develop signals and procedures that become standard across the fleet. The barrier crash procedures are refined and adopted. The flight deck crew organization is tested and improved. These innovations transfer to fleet carriers. Wolverine and Sable are laboratories where procedures are developed and tested under controlled conditions. The lessons learned improve fleet carrier operations. This feedback loop is valuable. Training platforms that improve operational platforms create multiplier effects. The value exceeds the direct training provided. The emotional dimension for pilots is significant. Qualifying on a carrier is a milestone. It transforms a student into a naval aviator. The qualification is earned through skill and courage. Landing on a moving deck is difficult and dangerous. Succeeding proves competence. The pilots remember their first carrier landing forever. For 17,000 pilots, that first landing occurred on Wolverine or Sable. The setting is unglamorous. A paddle wheel steamer on Lake Michigan is not the Pacific Theater, but the achievement is real, the pride is justified, the qualification is earned. This psychological dimension matters. Confident pilots perform better than uncertain pilots. The confidence built on Wolverine and Sable carries into combat. The strategic error of focusing only on fleet carriers is avoided through Wolverine and Sable. Fleet carriers are combat platforms. Using them for training is inefficient. They are expensive. They are vulnerable. They are needed in combat zones. Training carriers are cheap. They are safe. They are available. Separating training from combat platforms is efficient use of resources. This seems obvious in hindsight. It was not obvious in 1941. The Navy had to discover this through necessity. The paddle wheel carriers are that discovery's result. The lesson is that specialized platforms for specialized missions are often more efficient than multi-purpose platforms. The cultural impact on naval aviation is lasting. The freshwater Navy becomes part of naval aviation lore. Stories are told and retold. The paddle wheel carriers that trained the Pacific War pilots, the aircraft on the lake bottom, the crashes and near misses, the LSOs guiding nervous students. These stories create shared identity among naval aviators. They establish tradition. New generations of naval aviators learn about Wolverine and Sable. The ships represent innovation and adaptability. These are values naval aviation embraces. The cultural legacy exceeds the operational contribution. The comparison with Army Air Force training is informative. The Army trains pilots extensively but does not face carrier qualification requirement. Army pilots learn formation flying, navigation, bombing, and gunnery. They train on land airfields. No specialized platforms are needed. The Navy's requirement is unique. Carrier landing is specialized skill. It requires specialized training environment. Wolverine and Sable provide that environment. The Army has no equivalent. This difference reflects different operational requirements. Carriers require specialized pilots. The specialized training produces those pilots. The investment is justified by the unique requirement. The maintenance challenges increase as the ships age. Wolverine is 30 years old when converted. Sable is 18 years old. Both ships have mechanical issues. The paddle wheels require constant repair. The steam engines are obsolete. Parts are difficult to obtain. The shipyard at Glenview performs miracles keeping the ships operational. But by 1945, both ships are deteriorating. Sable develops hull leaks in May 1945. Wolverine's port paddle wheel cracks in July. The ships are wearing out. They have served hard for 3 years. The end is approaching. When the war ends in August, decommissioning is immediate. The ships have nothing left to give. The final statistics are remarkable. 116,000 carrier landing attempts, 115,154 successful landings, 846 aircraft lost, 8 pilots killed, 17,198 pilots qualified. These numbers represent mass production of naval aviation capability. The scale is unprecedented. No training program before or since has qualified so many carrier pilots so quickly. The achievement is enabled by dedicated platforms, standardized procedures, experienced instructors, and accepting risk to achieve results. The 8 pilots who died are tragic losses. But 8 deaths to qualify 17,000 pilots is acceptable ratio in wartime. The program succeeds by any measure. The legacy vessels honor the memory. No ships are named Wolverine or Sable after the training carriers. The names are not reused. But Naval Air Station Glenview is renamed several times and eventually closed in 1995. The base's mission ends with the Cold War. The runways are demolished. The hangars are converted to civilian use. Nothing remains of the physical infrastructure. But the memory persists. Reunions are held. Veterans gather. They share stories. They remember the freshwater carriers. The gatherings continue into the 21st century. The last pilots trained on Wolverine and Sable are in their 90s. Soon there will be no one left who remembers firsthand. The memory will become history. The history will become legend. The archaeological sites on Lake Michigan are protected. The aircraft wrecks are listed as historic sites. Disturbing them is prohibited. Sport divers can observe but not touch. This protection ensures the wrecks remain for future study. Technology improves. Someday, detailed archaeological surveys may reveal new information. The aircraft are time capsules. They contain artifacts from 1942 to 1945. Flight instruments, radios, weapons, personal items left by pilots. These artifacts tell stories. The stories inform history. The protection is appropriate. The wrecks are memorials to the training program and to the 8 pilots who died. The economic legacy is the efficient use of existing resources. The Navy could have built purpose-designed training carriers. The cost would have been $20 million per ship. The time would have been 3 years per ship. The first ship would have entered service in 1945. Too late to matter. Instead, the Navy spent $2 million converting existing ships and had them operational in 5 months. This is 10-to-1 cost advantage and 6-to-1 time advantage. The efficiency is remarkable. It demonstrates that creative adaptation of existing assets can be more effective than building new purpose-designed assets. This lesson applies beyond military context. It applies to any situation requiring rapid capability development with limited resources. The human legacy is 17,000 carrier pilots. These men fought the Pacific War. They sank Japanese carriers at Midway. They destroyed Japanese aircraft at Philippine Sea. They supported invasions at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They struck the Japanese home islands. Their contribution to victory is incalculable. They were enabled by training received on 2 paddle wheel steamers in Lake Michigan. The connection is direct. Without Wolverine and Sable, these pilots could not have been qualified. Without qualified pilots, the carriers could not have operated. Without carrier operations, the Pacific War would have lasted longer and cost more lives. The paddle wheel carriers mattered. Their contribution to victory is real, even if indirect. The irony is that the most successful training carriers in naval history were never intended to be carriers. They were built as luxury passenger steamers. They carried tourists and vacationers between Great Lakes cities. They provided comfortable transport and pleasant cruises. When war came, they were transformed. The luxuries were stripped away. Flight decks were installed. The elegant steamers became ungainly training platforms. But they served well. They trained more pilots than any purpose-built carriers. They proved that utility matters more than elegance. Function matters more than form. This is a lesson in engineering and in life. The final assessment must acknowledge both the desperation that created the program and the brilliance that made it succeed. The Navy in 1942 was desperate. The carrier pilot shortage was crisis. The solution, converting paddle wheel steamers, was improvised. No one knew if it would work. It worked. It worked because sailors and aviators made it work. They adapted procedures. They developed techniques. They accepted risk. They trained pilots. The program succeeded through competence and determination. This is how desperate measures become brilliant solutions. The brilliance is not in the concept. Paddle wheel carriers are absurd. The brilliance is in the execution. Making absurd concept work requires skill and commitment. The freshwater Navy had both. The memorial that should exist does not. There is no monument to Wolverine and Sable. There is no plaque commemorating the 17,000 pilots they trained. The ships are forgotten except by veterans and historians. This is unfortunate. The contribution deserves recognition. But perhaps the real memorial is the victory in the Pacific. The pilots trained on Wolverine and Sable won that victory. Every carrier battle, every island invasion, every bombing raid involved pilots who learned to land on a paddle wheel carrier in Lake Michigan. Their success is the memorial. The victory is the recognition. No monument is needed. The outcome speaks for itself. The final image is Wolverine departing Glenview Pier on a summer morning in 1943. The paddle wheels churn. The black smoke rises. The flight deck is empty. Aircraft are warming up at Glenview. They will fly to the ship soon. Student pilots will make their first attempts. Some will succeed. Some will fail. Some will crash. One may die, but most will qualify. They will join fleet carriers. They will fight. Some will die in combat. Most will survive. All will remember their first carrier landing on a paddle wheel steamer in Lake Michigan. In a war that demanded improvisation and rewarded adaptability, Wolverine and Sable were both. They improvised carrier training. They adapted lake steamers to naval aviation. They succeeded beyond reasonable expectation. They trained the pilots who won the Pacific War. This is their legacy. This is their memorial. This is their place in history. 2 paddle wheel steamers that became the most important training carriers America ever operated. Not because they were elegant, not because they were powerful, because they were there when needed and did the job required. In VAR, this is all that matters.